So, Carl and Paloma, it's so great to have you with me, and I thank you for being part of this conversation series, The Future is Calling Us to Greatness.
Thank you very much. We're happy to be here.
Thank you, Michael. It's
Cool.
an honor to be here.
Cool. Well, it's an honor to have the both of you, and I want to just invite you at the beginning to really share with our audience, because not everybody will be familiar with you and your work. So, take some time to help us get to know who you are, what you're particularly passionate about, what you're committed to, that sort of thing, and just run with it. Don't be bashful, please.
Okay. Well, I have been an environmentalist for about 30 years. I was trained as an architect and an urban planner, and I got involved with environmentalism and ended up being president of Earth Island Institute. And I started a program there called the Urban Habitat Program. And the basic idea behind this program was to actually address the issues of race in the context of the emerging vision of the environment. And we found that we had to make adjustments going both ways. So I've been working on that now for 25 or 30 years. And Dr. Pavel, you want to say who you are?
Thank you. I've also been working in the environmental movement for about 30 years, and I came to this through my work in deep ecology. Actually, I had been part of a Benedictine monastic community on the coast of Maine, and also created a learning and leadership center, which we built by hand, that involved kind of listening and learning from nature and living systems as an inspiration for our current passion and action in the world.
So we've been struggling with these ideas and growing and learning about these ideas. And the basic thing, I think, if I would just to simply reduce it to a message, particularly since we've been so much influenced by Thomas Berry and the idea of the universe story, that this vision of human beings being a part of the evolution of the universe gives us a major opportunity to reconceptualize the way we think about race. It also really puts into highlight the need for people of color to assume leadership, not only for their own communities, but also to share in the leadership of the whole society.
Yeah, well, that's great. In fact, I'd like you to actually say a little bit more about that, but I'm also noticing we've got a slight bandwidth issue. So when you're talking, I'm going to go off my video, so you'll just see my face, but then I'll come back on when I'm talking. That way you've got the most bandwidth so that it doesn't cut out. So yeah, please say more about that, because one of the things I've loved about, or where I felt the synergy, is that we both have some of the same people that have deeply inspired us, Joanna Macy, Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, Mary Evelyn Tucker. And so, yeah, please continue on in that direction you just started in, Carl.
Well, to put it simply, we have a conception of race, which we actually have inherited from the last 400 years, maybe 300 years. The idea of race came into being as part of the application of the slave trade. And we understood and conceptualized African people as being slaves who were subordinate to white people. And when we really look at big history, we can begin to see that this picture is entirely false. Now, many of us have known that it's been entirely false, but I think the issue is that we now have both an awareness of our destiny in relationship to the whole evolution of the stars, but we also are facing a huge crisis on the planet where we really need to have all hands on deck. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, amen. I mean, one of the things, as I understand, you all were just recently at the International Big History Association conference, weren't you?
Yes,
That's right.
In fact, we were.
That's great. Well, what did you present on while you were there?
Our topic was Big History Meets Climate Justice in California. And one of the things that we've been really excited about is taking the big history ideas and the universe story concepts and really applying them in innovative settings. So we've been working with coalitions who are working multiracial, multi-sector coalitions that are working for climate reform in California. And we've been very excited about seeing how Big History has a role to play with coalitions. So one of the strategies that we shared at the Big History Conference was a giant climate change map where we started with the Big Bang at one end of history and then moved forward into this sort of funnel moment where we can act, and then also seeing history moving outward into the future from that, and had people actually begin to feel their own story in this moment in time and the various movements that they're a part of being part of Big History.
And so, as a matter of fact, I think one of the main innovations that we have also kind of put forward is the idea that we need to think about transforming our cities and our regions, the places where we live, work, and pray, because in actuality, even though we really very much connect to the vision of the ecozoic transformation, we need to really understand that over half of the human population now lives in cities, and in the United States, it's really up around 75%. So we need to think about how we're going to transform the cities in our daily life in ways that actually can help to conform to a more a greater resonance with the needs of ecology and other species on the planet. And we see this moment, in terms of Big History. Some of the people who've talked about it have talked about these 8 great thresholds. We see ourselves as being on the edge of a 9th threshold, which, if we're successful, we will come through and actually produce a different kind of society. But if we're not successful, then we really face the way that the dinosaurs were just done.
Yeah. Well, you've touched on so many things. I want to sort of go about 4 different directions at once. Let me take them one at a time.
I'd like to say one thing that kind of summarizes some of the intersections that we're working at. We see this environmental heating up and the economic meltdown and the social equity disparities, the growing gap of rich and poor, these 3 areas of economy, environment, and equity as being in one way a triple threat, but we see it as a triple opportunity. So here, as we're facing climate change together, as these new city people, we've really, in the space of a century, become a city planet. In 1907, there were only 7% of the world in cities, and now it's 70%.
Wow.
So we're now a city planet. We see that this triple threshold is our triple opportunity to really assist all 3 of those moving forward. And we think it's really one of the most exciting moments in the history of the planet.
Yeah, exciting and terrifying both, but I'm glad you're focusing on the inspirational side, because so oftentimes people can get paralyzed by the challenges before us and not be present to how all crises, all breakdowns, all difficulties also have the seed within themselves of new possibilities, new opportunities. And sometimes the bigger the crisis, the bigger the opportunity, but it takes that crisis to actually catalyze something new.
And I think we share that point that Joanna Macy made in her most recent book called Act of Hope. And the idea is not to just simply be optimistic about the way the world is going to change, but there's a commitment in the face of all the tragedy, in the face of all of the crises, to really make a commitment to transform that. And so we're joining hands and joining many people around the world in trying to find new ways to transform our cities that are consistent with the sustainability of life on the planet.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree. In fact, Joanna Macy's book, Act of Hope, is our best-selling book. Connie and I support ourselves by traveling around the continent, speaking in churches and colleges and what have you. And we set a self-serve table of books and DVDs in the back. And her book, Act of Hope, is actually our top-selling book. So I agree with you. It's often just to be engaged in one thing in the right direction can take the depression or the overwhelm away. Say a little bit more about how you see or experiences you've had about changes within cities and folks who live in urban environments, please.
Well, as I say, we're looking at transforming the urban environment. We were blessed. It was a fortunate convergence of interests that the state of California passed some pretty exciting legislation. One was AB 32, which required all of the required the state as a whole to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by the year 2020.
Just to give that some graphic representation, we're going from 14 tons of carbon per person in the state to 2 tons.
That's what Arnold Schwarzenegger put forward in the executive order.
Yeah.
By 2050 to reduce his CO2 emissions to 2%. To 2 tons per person. So that's a radical transformation. That means everything must change.
Yes, exactly.
Everything must change. And so we took some steps. There's another piece of legislation passed called SB 375, in which the goal was for each of the metropolitan transportation agencies. The goal was to reach a certain target for each region, which means getting people out of their cars, planning to build more of the housing that's needed near transportation corridors, and really promote walking and other various activities that would really support that.
Yeah, that's great. Do you all know David Gershon by any chance?
Sure.
Because I interviewed him for this series, but I also worked very closely with David for 5 years. I met him in 1990 or 89, I guess, and then did a couple eco teams, and then I became the campaign manager for the Global Action Plan Eco Team program in Portland, Oregon, the Portland Sustainable Lifestyle Campaign, and then also in New York. And so David has been an older brother on the path and a mentor and a friend for decades now. And his work with cities and trying to, from the ground up, get people to change their lifestyle habits to habitually use less water, drive less, compost, recycle, all the different aspects of living a more earth-friendly, sustainable lifestyle have been really important. We can't rely just on the top down. And of course, as we all know, habits don't change easily. We typically need peer support and accountability for habits to change. And so I was not at all surprised that you're familiar with David. One of the things...
let me just say this.
Sure.
I mean, one thing that we have been really advocating is to make sure that we integrate the issue of social justice in this transformation. Very often people talk about a green transformation and think of doing very important things connected with that, but they don't really see the widening gap between the rich and the poor, and really how do you address the racial diversity of the country, what kind of positive steps that need to be taken. And from our point of view, this climate change offers us an opportunity to really reconceptualize the issues of race and think about them in new ways. So we have a number of things that we put forward. I would just mention a few that I think would really support this kind of transformation. One of them is really a very large issue, which is investment without displacement. We have, for example, in California, many people who already live near transit stations, and they live there because they've been, it's an affordable lifestyle. They live in neighborhoods. And if, in fact, more wealthy people move into those neighborhoods and buy up housing in those neighborhoods, the potential reality is that the poor people will be pushed way out to the fringe and will end up having to drive 3 or 4 times as much as they did before. So they would be contributing to the greenhouse gas issues, but also the social inequities of, in a sense, of giving the privileged places to the people with more money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the work that you're doing in terms of bringing the big story, big picture, big history, epic of evolution, universe story, whatever you want to call it. Connie's in my main website is thegreatstory.org. So bringing that and the deep sensitivity to climate and the challenges before us, and the focus on sort of urban transformation and a strong attention to the justice issues, both in terms of racial justice and also in terms of the, as you've said now a couple times, this growing gap between the rich and the poor, which we now know, we don't believe it, we know that contributes to the demise of civilizations when it's just utterly unsustainable. So we've got to, it's not like we can only deal with one of these issues. We've got to deal with all of them, and that's what you all are doing.
Deal with them simultaneously.
Yeah. Well, share a little bit more in terms of what your experiences.
We're really excited also. Great demographic shift is going on in America, and by 2042, the majority of people in the United States will be people of color. So we have this transformation that's been going on in the last couple of decades, which is now going to reach a peak. And therefore, a real important question is how we can really more substantially address the issues of social and racial justice at the same time that we're dealing with climate change. One thing is on our side, I might say, is that even if you look at polling statistics, you find out that people of color generally are, in terms of their voting and in terms of their behavior, are generally more responsive to the sort of requirements of environment than are the white population. So what we have to do is to continue to reinforce those characteristics at the same time, giving people of color the benefits of more inclusive way of life.
Yeah, amen.
Right.
Well, I'm curious, how do the two of you engage in this big picture but practically local work that you do and stay inspired in the face of some pretty scary stuff? What are some of the practices, or how do you think, or anything that you'd like to share in terms of your own spiritual practice or your own emotional, whatever it is that allows you and empowers you to do the work you do in the face of really challenging times and scary stuff?
Do you want to answer that?
Oh, I'd love to. So, Michael, we've been in this coalition building soup where we've been growing and challenged and learning really at the speed of soul the last couple of years. And I wanted to just share a little bit about what we've been learning. Our organization is called Breakthrough Communities, and and this book is really kind of the basis of the work that we've begun doing here in California. So after 10 years of working nationally with groups, we began listening and learning for what is it that actually makes groups and coalitions most successful. Mm-hmm. And we began discovering that there was actually a kind of code, an embedded model of leadership development and of action in the world. And so we'd love to share that with you. It's 5 stages. It's something that we can learn from and apply. We apply it in our individual lives as well as our organizational lives. And it's been helping us with our coalitions here in California. And we'd also like to share some of the success and the results that we've been having with that.
Please go for it. I mean, you've got our attention.
Like so when we began seeing this kind of rise up out of the work, it was thrilling. And the first stage is waking up. That at any stage of this work, we're waking up to new aspects. So yes. Part of what we're waking up to is how when you lead with equity, that environment and economy can also succeed. And that's,
as a matter of fact, we went through a process in the Bay Area, which is 7 million people live in the Bay Area in 9 counties. We went through a process of developing, together with a number of groups in our coalition, a plan for the whole Bay Area, and we surprised everybody because it turned out to be more successful in addressing the greenhouse gas emissions than the other alternatives. And this was the alternatives that were developed by ABAG and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission.
I think that actually is would be interesting to your audience, that there are these processes of planning that are going on, and citizens are often invited to them, but don't always know until they're over, what the decisions are that were made. And so by having a coalition that stays alert and tracks with some of the activities of that, it enables the whole group to succeed. And so the processes that we are about to describe were ones that we used together as part of the 6 wins for regional equity in the Bay Area. And Carl's describing a time when these 6 groups came together, and we had to make a big decision, which was, how do we learn to work together? So we had to learn and wake up to our power is greater together. And if we don't learn how to work together, we're not going to be able to have the influence and the impact that is needed for the size and scale of what we're facing. So it wasn't a small thing for groups to come together and decide, you know what, we can't eat each other. We have to.
Well, in addition to that, and it also gets to the second point that you're going to mention about the compass, many of these groups have been involved for years in protests. And we see the value of protests. It's really very, very important. And so this decision came up, well, are we going to actually support and reinforce a public mandate to really change the way that we live in the cities? And there was many reasons why people would say, no, we're not going to support that at all. We don't want to be displaced. We have many disadvantages in the current society, but we could get a lot worse. Mm-hmm. So there was this temptation to really say no.
Right. And that is I guess maybe we could talk about the 5 stages of our compass.
I'd love you to do that, but I want to say I just want to interject one thing first, which is that 2 of the other people that I've interviewed as part of the series are longtime friends of mine, Peggy Holman and Tom Atlee. And both of them, of course, have worked with a number of different groups, and Peggy is really one of the world's experts in terms of various processes, things, ways of communicating and coming to decision and making, dealing with differences that facilitate collective intelligence rather than collective stupidity. Of course, Tom Atlee's work has been that too. And what you're pointing to is the importance of building coalitions and then finding processes within those gatherings so that really collective intelligence and collective wisdom is elicited.
Exactly.
And these skills are evolving in this time and are knowable and learnable, and we're always ready to share what we've been learning. And in this case, we're working with multiracial coalitions and also multi-sector coalitions. So some folks are working in areas of housing, others in transportation, others in public health. And it's a shift that happens in learning to see the world through the eyes of another, so that even though it seems as though climate change is an issue about transportation, 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in California come through the transportation sector, and yet where our housing is located affects how far we have to drive. So transportation is a big part of it, and for many of our vulnerable communities, the face of climate change isn't a polar bear. The face of climate change for many of our communities is children with asthma.
Yes.
Health effects, elderly and young people who are having asthma or respiratory infections that are exacerbated by rising temperatures and heat vectors. So when we finally got the public health and the environmental transportation folks and the housing people and the people who are working against displacement and gentrification, as Carl described, and economic opportunity. Some people will say, if it doesn't drive the economy, it's not going to really make a dent. So getting these 6 sectors together that they actually could work.
You have to really picture this. These groups have been organizing around a single issue.
Right.
I'm a housing advocate, or I really believe in transportation, or we think jobs are really the most important thing. So these groups had their own language around each individual issue. And what we were saying is that we now have come to a point where there's a huge opportunity, and we can either come together and find a common thread that connects all these groups and reinterpret the individual agendas with that, or we're going to go down the tubes. So I think this brings us also to the next level of this compass that Dr. Pavel is talking about, which is after we sort of get ourselves together and we say, no, this is what we don't want, we now have to think in terms of, well, how do we get grounded and understand what it is that we do want?
Yes.
So
Yes.
It meant that all of these groups had to come together, listen to each other, learn about our current situation, and also put forth a vision that comes out of the integrity of their individual work, but actually blends them and makes it into a powerful coalition that crosses all these things.
And at the getting grounded stage, sometimes it's also about learning the science or learning the public policy strategy. You know, how are decisions getting made? Who are the people who are going to be around that table deciding what the plan is, in our case, for spending $270 billion on new infrastructure? You know, it's like getting grounded. You know, this is going to come down the pike, and it's either going to benefit.
Right. It's going to benefit a few people who are at the top, and most of the people are going to end up suffering. And we know that most of the extreme suffering is going to be by the people who are the poorest and the weakest. So we have a vested interest in helping to create more cohesive societies in the face of climate change. And I want to just mention one important fact about this. In terms of adaptability, one of the things that has been demonstrated many times over again is that communities that are cohesive and are organized are more to succeed in terms of protecting their health and whatnot in the face of disaster than those that are not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, okay, I've got to ask, for me, what's the obvious question, which is, both of you are clearly visionaries with big heart and a big picture. Who's the master facilitator? Like, are both of you great facilitators? Because taking groups of people this diverse and having something really quality come out of them surely requires some gifted facilitation. So is that both of you, or one of you, or somebody else on the team?
The truth of the matter is that we both have different strengths and different capabilities. And Dr. Pavel is trained as a psychologist and has an enormous wealth of experience that comes out of her experience as a psychologist. I am an architect and an urban planner, and my history has been working with groups around some of these technical issues. And so at different times in different places, I think we both have this, make our contribution.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So continue describing both your process and what you've learned or your experience.
At this getting grounded stage, I think the skills that each of us bring are both needed in different ways. So some of the technical things about, you know, how do we measure greenhouse gases? How do we map and track those assets of vulnerability as well as strength in our communities? That's a place where Carl is a genius. And then when it comes to, you know, how do we actually get ourselves all in the room and listen to one another and learn to kind of talk together in a way that surfaces the issues that are not just easy to talk about, but some of the things that represent our deepest fears and a sense of vulnerability. That's something that I have a passion for. So getting grounded can be also getting grounded in our histories and stories. Yeah. And sometimes it takes us slowing down and getting to know one another on deeper levels. And we'll often bring people together with telling your 3-generation story of how did you travel to here. There are so many, we're finding that more and more people are river people, are people who have migration stories of various kinds, that we've all kind of flowed from other places and come to this place. Some of us through the bottoms of slave ships, and some of us crossing in boats that are at great risk.
Yeah, and I think it's also true that people have different vulnerabilities when it comes to actually exploring and understanding who they are. And in particular, I've been really looking much more closely at the African and African-American experience. And we find that there's a whole series of experiences that people have had over generations, which the dominant society has not been willing to look at. And to some extent, I don't know whether you're familiar with a wonderful book that was written by Wendell Berry called The Hidden Wound. He wrote a book called The Hidden Wound, and the basic point of this was the impact of racism on him as a white person. the ways in which it destroyed his sense of who he was. And he goes through elaborate distinctions in his own livelihood, and he realized that after a number of years, he had completely erased these experiences because they were too painful. Wow. And what he also found out was he erased his whole experience of childhood, because he comes from Kentucky, where the black population are much larger than they were at Stanford University, where he was teaching.
Wow. Wow. Well, you know, what you're reminding me of, obviously, yes, I'm deeply familiar with Wendell Berry's work, although not that book. I've held him as an older brother on the path for decades now. But I also, what you're reminding me is when I was pastoring, I pastored 3 churches over the course of a decade, 3 United Church of Christ congregations. And my third church was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it was quite an extraordinary little church. They've about 25% of the church were African Americans, a very peace and justice and sustainability oriented congregation. And I came to that congregation when I was, 37 years old or something like that. And, you know, I thought I understood racial issues and this sort of thing, multicultural issues. And boy, they took on educating me, because as a firstborn male, I was just completely oblivious to all the places and ways that I had experienced privilege and had just taken for granted, and thus lacked certain sensibilities and sensitivities. And so it sounds like Wendell Berry has made a significant contribution with that book.
Yeah, that certainly is the case. And I also would like to remind some of your listeners, they may not know, that the United Church of Christ also played a really important role in the beginning of the environmental justice movement.
Yes.
The Commission on Race, or what I think it was called, the Commission on Racial Justice,
yes,
published that book called Toxic Waste and Race. Mm-hmm. Actually identified the location of hazardous waste sites throughout the country, and found out that 3 out of 4 are located in communities of color. And this was an astounding investigation that they really put forward. So I really take my hat off to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yep.
One of the things that we're finding when you talked about toxic waste and toxic race, Carl, is in that stage of getting grounded, we often find that people begin to unearth a way in which we have built this, our cities, with a kind of spatial apartheid. And that spatial apartheid, where we build freeways to keep us from community groups that we're afraid of, or we've kind of created the other side of the tracks is now kind of the other side of the highway. But what that spatial apartheid also is a reflection of the spatial apartheid in our own consciousness. So there are places that we've walled off, like Wendell Berry and like each of us. And as we begin looking at our cities from a deeper and deeper standpoint, we also have the opportunity to make our own selves whole as we see what have we walled off inside of ourselves and among our communities.
Yeah. And one of the things that I also would point out, the next stage of development, according to this compass that Dr. Pavel has been talking about, is reaching for new opportunities. And one of the things that we've found is that sometimes people are so entrenched in their own understanding of their own opportunity, their own situation, that they fail to see the assets around them that they could actually reach for. And this is one of the wonderful things I think about the universe story and all of the work that is going on with Big History, is that this is a really new opportunity for us to stretch toward an understanding of who we are, not only as descendants of our mothers and our grandmothers and grandfathers, but also that we actually descended from the stars. And that means that we need to actually own the whole evolutionary pattern that we've come to learn about, as scientists have learned about how the evolution developed. But as in a popular sense, we need to really embrace that as an example of something that really represents our potential. So as we reach for new opportunities and we reach for the stars, we also can unlock many of the hidden gifts and the hidden treasures that exist in society.
Amen, brother. You got an amen corner here, I assure you.
And on a really beautiful example of a community that did that in a spectacular way is a group in West Harlem called the We Act, the West Harlem Action Coalition.
Okay.
And beautiful, amazing work that they did in as they were waking up to their capacity and power as a community. They learned to say no to a sewage treatment plant, a huge, one of the largest in the history of the United States, that was going to be built right at the end of 125th Street on the Hudson, the last waterfront in all of Manhattan. And they were able to stop that, you know,
Wow.
and that took them into that stage of getting grounded and going, hey, how come we're the dumping ground?
Yes.
You know, what parts of our history can we draw on that are actually noble and powerful? The Harlem Renaissance and a whole kind of cultural, visionary history, a political history, very exciting that they could reclaim to help them actually gain a new horizon and a new opportunity. And we were with them the day that we stood on the coast, on the edge of that place where that sewage treatment plant that they'd said no to, and they looked out and went, look, it's the Hudson River, it's the Palisades. And this is...
You can see all the way down, all the way up to the beginnings of the Hudson River, and then down toward where the Statue of Liberty is standing there right on it. And this was like, well, hold it. It's this ghetto.
Who are we?
Yeah,
Who
we're
are
actually
we?
connected to this really
Wow.
understanding of who we are as people. And it was the one place that was left in the sort of reconnecting the waterfront of the whole of Manhattan.
Yeah.
And as they did that, they then began envisioning, well, what's a greater vision, a greatness that we could have for this neighborhood and for this part of Manhattan that actually would be inventing something new? What's something that we can say yes to, that we can move from saying no to the sewage treatment plant? What's the yes that we can dream together here? What's a new vision? And they came up with 3 facets of a new vision on that day. And one was that this could be our park, and this could be a park that connects us to a larger regional park asset surrounding all of Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And linking us up historically to this Hudson River and to the assets of the river. And it could be a place that our community can take advantage of, but also is a destination. So an environmental asset. Mm-hmm. They also saw that they have a tremendous cultural identity. And rather than having this sort of African-American and Latino Puerto Rican fight going on that separated their power, what would it be like to actually link and create a kind of bicultural center that would bring in masters of poetry and music and dance from around the world, not just in Manhattan. And so they wanted a cultural center. And then the third was to link themselves, like we talked about the economy, linking themselves to the to jobs, to the financial centers of New York and of the world, and to be on the Hudson, on the rail line, so that the subway came and was a stop there. Mm-hmm. And so those 3 things they fought for, and that was part of the yes. And it was thrilling to be there for the cutting of the ribbon of the Julia Burgos Cultural Center that's now at the destination place of the public transit, and then walk down the street to the new park that is there, and is something that is now a destination in a positive sense for West Harlem.
So that's just one example. We have in our book Breakthrough Communities, we have 12 case studies of places all across the country, including people who were losing their land that they had inherited from many generations. We're losing it to developers. We have cases in Chicago and the biggest cities, in Los Angeles, the transformation.
Detroit, New Orleans.
So you tell these stories in your book?
And this book has been out now since 2009.
We tell this. We tell the stories, but what we do is we make this vehicle available so that each story is told 2 ways, and it's told through the voices of the people on the ground who did the work,
right?
And they tell it sort of in that this is where we started and it was really tough and this is how we made it through. And then we tell it also through the voice of policy experts who give the anatomy of that strategy.
Oh, wow.
And show, so it's a tool that you can take to your decision makers and say, hey,
yes,
we want to do land banking here. They did it in Detroit. And this is how you do it. It's all laid out here and it's already been done.
This is brilliant.
And it also tells the story through the empathy of what it's like to really make it through on the ground with that effort. So we're really the weavers of this book and of the voices of people throughout the United States who are working in 12 different regions for success. And that's where this theme of breakthrough comes about, is that communities that were considered to be in breakdown are actually rallying their multiracial leadership and having this transformation of the economy, the environment, and equity by leading with social equity and social justice.
Wow. So what I'd like to do, because I don't know how much time we have, but I'd like to actually mention 3 book projects that we want to talk about.
Okay.
The first one, which is my book, which is nearing completion, the new book is nearing completion, is called The Earth, the City, and the Hidden Narrative of Race, Discovering New Pathways Through the Great Work of Our Time. And this book actually looks at the history and evolution of the African and African American communities from the first hominids that came out of the trees and walked across the savannah to up to Katrina in the present day, and proposes this metropolitan strategy as the really focal point of a new generation of policies that affect not just Black people, not improving just Black people, but actually promoting social and racial justice for all people, including many of the immigrants and others who are coming to society. The second book, which is also in press, which Paloma can talk about, she has 2 books to talk about. But the second one really describes the heroes of this movement for climate justice in California, around SB 375. And then one that's just hot off of the presses, which is...
That's Climate Justice, Frontline Stories from Groundbreaking Coalitions in California. And if we have time, we'd love to share one of the groundbreaking stories here in California that coalitions have had in the last year.
Go for it. Absolutely.
And then the other one, which is also a real treasure, which is Paloma is the author of this, and it has a foreword by Desmond Tutu called "Random Acts of Kindness." Maybe you could say a few words about this.
So this is really a prose poem, "Random Kindness and Senseless Acts of Beauty," and I was thinking we might, as part of our ending today, have a couple lines from it.
Well, I've heard that meme for years, for decades. You're the creator of that?
Ann Herbert, my co-partner and co-author in this, and I are the originators of the phrase in the book.
Totally cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, it was very amazing in response to actually initially the Rodney King incident, racial violence in America, and the pending Persian Gulf War at that time, and how we saw that we were kind of hell-bent on the drumbeat for violence and war. And we were trying to think of how to create a kind of spell that might break this trance that we were in. And I think it's taking the phrase random violence and senseless acts of cruelty and reversing it. So I think the meme, and part of why it has caught on for people, is because that's embedded already in our consciousness and in our routinized listening. And then to hear random kindness and senseless acts of beauty as the reversal of violence and cruelty and the antidote.
What you're saying makes so much sense, and it was always unconscious for me. And it's like, I'm in this moment, I'm having this big, whoa, light bulb come on.
Yes.
And this was 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, I go.
Yeah.
So our 20th anniversary edition is coming out with this foreword by Desmond Tutu, and what he really awakens in us and in responding and honoring sort of the work of this Random Kindness Project, because this book, with the 20th anniversary edition, is really launching our global climate and community resilience project. So the compass that we're describing is actually part of a multimedia interactive workshop and training that we've been offering. And it starts with sort of the inspiration and big picture and a video that Carl has created to go with his book, The Earth, the City, and the Hidden Narrative of Race. And then it takes people into that deep sort of personal journey of what is it that I bring to this moment in history? How is Gaia calling me in this moment? How is this great triple threat also my personal opportunity to greatness? And we see the transformative process that people are being called to as they get involved with this activism. It's thrilling. And then we have the practical strategies that we practice and kind of walk through together. And then we leave with celebration, going forward, and including the some of the spirit and stories from Random Kindness and Senseless Acts of Beauty.
Y'all are, I mean, I've been inspired. This is, I'm interviewing 40 amazing people, or actually 42, I guess, amazing people. You're the first time that I've actually had two people on the screen at the same time. And I'm just blown away. I mean, it's a very humbling process because, I mean, I know Connie and I are doing great work in the world, but it's so incredible to meet people who are doing work that I keep having this thought, oh my God, this is the most important work on the planet. And I certainly feel that about what you're doing, what you're up to, what you're sharing. I'm actually going to suggest that this interview be put on Skype to just as a way of sort of enticing and introducing people to this whole series of The Future is Calling Us to Greatness. So please continue.
Okay, thank you. So what Desmond Tutu offered when he responded to Random Kindness and Senseless Acts of Beauty was to really remind us of this, both this ancient understanding of Ubuntu, U-B-U-N-T-U, Ubuntu, the notion that that I am because we are, that we are interconnected radically and deeply, and that he calls us to be life artists in this moment, and that we have in each moment the choice to, in our book we say, to find delight or start the fight. So we see that this moment of this deepest challenge and complexity actually calls forth the greatness that is in us, that there is like a jewel or a kind of quality of leadership, and that we all have different qualities of leadership, a kind of ecology of leadership, whether it's the quiet moss or the roaring brook. Every one of us has a quality of leadership that we're called to. And just like the pine cone that opens when the fire is on, those resin-based pine cones that release the seeds when the heat melts the resin, that the heat is on and that it's calling for each of the seeds that every one of us is. Amen. So I think it would be thrilling to hear about the story of what success we've had this year as community groups are stepping forward, and we're meeting up with folks, whether it's people, white folks in suburban churches or inner city activists, are linking together on behalf of climate and having success.
I have to tell you one aspect of our wonderful set of experiences. It was called the Education Advocacy Day, and this is the second time we just did it a couple of weeks ago. And what this day is in the morning, about 50 or 75 people come together and review the year's worth of work that we've done in organizing, and in the morning, and then at noon and in the afternoon they go out and meet with all of the legislators who are in charge of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governors, government, in the afternoon. There's enough people that they can go in teams and meet with all of these folks. And what this does, what this has been doing, is you have people of color, young people of color, going out and meeting older, white, suburban, established leaders and saying, hey, you know, we are here because we are the next generation, and we want to work with you in order to make this region a region that is sustainable and will work for us. So we just got through with a period of time doing this. By the way, we have video document of this. We're making into.
We'd love to share that with you, Michael. Just see this in action.
Yes.
Strategies that we see could be used in many communities. And what was thrilling is seeing this cross-pollination that happens, just like in permaculture when they talk about the edge between different ecozones being the most fertile place where new evolution and more resilient species evolve. We see that's what's happening in our communities, that these inner city and suburban white mixed race groups are coming together, and as they're putting together their housing, public health, environmental, and economic activism in support of and learning to work together, that it calls forth. This is the greatness part that I see, is that the commitment to that larger goal then links, and as people link, across differences, then as we're learning from each other, we encourage the greatness and pull forward qualities that otherwise wouldn't be released.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So
yeah, and I think our viewpoint of this is really pretty simple, because it's within each of us, but we don't know about this. We don't know about this until we actually discover it in ourselves and discover it in other people. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say a word about the traditions that we come from. There are many multiracial, multicultural communities, components of this, that people come from Asia, from Africa, from Central America, and also from Europe. But I want to just point out that the African people were brought to the New World as captives. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until they joined up with the people in London in the abolitionist movement that we began to build the kind of case that we needed to do to eliminate slavery. And we very often tell this story in terms of, here's what the black people did, or here's what the white people did. We don't tell it often enough in terms of, this is what their collaboration was. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people think, well, gee, this is really important, but I don't know. I'm the first guy that ever thought of this. And the fact of the matter is that there's a long history of this kind of collaboration. And as we saw that we were able, at the end of the Civil War, to eliminate slavery and to actually make some adjustments that were right, we now have a new opportunity and a new challenge, because in the same way that the plantation owners were invested in this huge challenge of a society, a way of life that they had to give up. They couldn't see how to do it. We are now on the threshold of a new challenge where we have a way of life that we need to give up. And we need to find not just things that are wrong with the way that the world is put together, but we need to find a way that we can make it right. Yeah. And this is, again, what you talk about, the challenge to greatness. We have this capacity to do this and to also demonstrate to the countries all over the world that justice is really a part of the struggle for climate adaptation and mitigation. The justice is really a central part of that and has to be included along with all the other strategies that are being developed. And that there's not necessarily an opposition between those who say we need to be more technically proficient in putting together good technical solutions, and the other people who are saying we really need to come together as more healthy communities and find common ground in the kind of things that makes our communities great.
Yeah, and well, one of the things that you're reminding me of is that there's only been one other time, I think, that in this series where I was literally brought to tears, and that was in my conversation with Nikki Silvestri at Green for All. And she was sharing something that Paloma, you mentioned earlier, which is when you invite people to build community, to get to know each other, to build intimacy and trust and rapport, you invite them to share I forget exactly, it's something 3-generation story. And I asked her, I said, Nikki, what inspires you to, on a daily basis to face, the challenges of our time? And she said, I think of my ancestors, and I actually meditate on my ancestors and the struggles and challenges that they faced. And then she gave a couple of examples, including a great-great-great-grandmother that, was repeatedly raped and children taken from her, and yet she didn't kill herself, and she's a direct descendant. I just was blown away. And I've then used that story with other groups when I'm trying to help people to really value the sacrifices and the struggles of past generations, and that in a very real sense, mythically speaking, of course, they're rooting us on. They're cheering us on. They want us to be inspired to do similarly in a way that is such a blessing to future generations.
Absolutely.
Well, please continue. Anything else any other stories? And then I've got one sort of off the wall question that I want to ask to both of you.
I think would be maybe good to really look at your poem. And Random Kindness. It's something that we've come to really treasure as a part of our part of the workshops that we do. Maybe you could.
And also we had I think when I look back on this last year, one of the transformational moments for me, Carl, was when our groups that had come through so many fights, so many difficulties together, actually reached a critical point where we said, you know what, we're giving advice to this metropolitan process, but they're kind of patting us on the head and dismissing us. How can we actually get them to take us seriously? And this is where some of the science and technology also comes in. And we saw that we needed to learn something that we didn't already know. We had to sort of explore a new horizon around this kind of complex transportation modeling process. And we spent several months where we actually went out and found the best transportation modelers in the country and said, will you listen to us? Will you take our dreams and the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge that we have about our communities and what we want in this larger regional plan that they're preparing that's going to determine the direction of how our metropolitan region grows over this century? Will you take our dreams and help us turn it into the language of technology that they will understand and respect in this process? And we also did political work on the other hand, where we went around and did these one-on-ones with elected officials and said, we want to put forward our own plan, and we want you to hear why that's important to us, and we want to know if you have objections, can we work with them to actually get to a yes with you? And over several months, when we finally came to the meeting that started in the 5 o'clock and went on up till the midnight hour, and it was late into the evening when we were working and kind of having meals and shifts and all, that one of our elected officials stood up and said, I propose that we recommend this equity, environment, and jobs scenario replace one of the scenarios that we were planning to test and actually include what these people have done. And we were packing the hall. And it was this moment where it was...
Well, the thing was the second vote. Another elected official said, I move that we make it unanimous. So there was this moment at the executive committee of the...
it was like our...
It was like this... it
was like our destiny was hanging in the balance right there. And this Republican guy coming through and saying this, we were like just stunned. And everyone, you could hear the hush in the room. And then you saw one by one the hands going up, that every board member did that. And at that moment, I wish that I could take you there, because at that moment, the scream, it was like the World Cup. and the scream that went out, and people rolled into the streets, and they accepted our scenario that we had worked and figured out how to get into the running with that. But the thing that happened after that was even more amazing, Michael. So that night, and I saw the power, when we watch these Olympics and things, we're watching people's greatness. Yeah. But what I saw that night is we saw our greatness, because we had been to the Olympics of, learning how to put our ideas together and how to work together, how to step back, how to step forward, how to let the young people, lead us at times. And there we were, we were unanimously invited into the process. And then the next day we went, holy shit. Now they're going to test our thing, and what's going to happen with it. And some of us were skeptical. I know, I thought, okay, that was a token gesture. It got them off the hot seat. They would have had a riot if they hadn't let us in. Who knows what it would have blown up that night. It was so intense in that room. But then the miracle that happened was that after they ran, the technical evaluation of all the scenarios, the number one that reduced greenhouse gas emissions most effectively against all of their professional scenarios was our scenario. Yeah. And that blew us away. Yeah. That amazed us about our own efforts.
And it really, in a sense, I think it really is a precursor of the many new inventions that are to come as we think about those communities of color that have not been in the process, that have not been allowed to participate, or for one reason or another, as we become a majority, hopefully an active majority, in helping to shape and to bring forward the best, along with many other people, the best that our society has to offer in response to this important global challenge. Yeah. And I think this is really the point when you talk about the rise to greatness. I think this is the point that we, in our community, in our neighborhoods, in the Bay Area of California, are saying we can do this. And not only can we do it in the Bay Area, not only can we do it in California, but we can actually do it across the country. And we can make our communities an example to the developing countries and others who are trying to struggle with how do we get a good way of life, and how do we do it in ways that are fair, and how do we do it in ways that lift up the most impoverished people. And I think if we put our minds to it, we have this real potential of transforming the world that we live in and making it much more sustainable and making it much more habitable for not only ourselves, but also the larger than human species, and really, in a sense, move into a new age.
And that what we're learning is that as we learn to work across these boundaries, that it really links us to not only to one another in our communities and makes us safer with one another, but also that it moves us beyond the U.S. to our translocal movements with people, that there really isn't any way. There isn't a way of really going around this. We can't export our inequality or our inequity and have the use of labor or of natural resources that are inequitable placed onto other countries to have our pollution sort of transferred and really work as a planet. But this climate issue is really a unifying issue where we really get to see our deep interconnectedness. One air, one water.
And one poem.
Oh, okay, right. There's a poem.
Right. So I also want to honor that, even though it's the two of us here speaking, that I think what we're really learning is that these coalitions and learning to work together and learning to explore the space between, the we space, that we are better together, and that's that as we move from an idea of sort of individual spirituality, that there is no private salvation, that actually by entering into this work together, we are transformed in the process, and that it accelerates our evolution in exciting ways.
Well, before you read the poem, I just want to say this because it's in my heart to say it. I remember hearing this phrase years ago, and I don't even remember. I think it was spoken of Joanna Macy by somebody. I don't remember who. But I feel this now with regards to not only the both of you, but the communities that you actually are also giving voice to, these coalitions and the people that you work closely with, is that you all have many, 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 many fans, and most of them are not even born yet.
And I guess, Carl, as an anchor, as we're sharing this, I'd like to dedicate this to one of our coalition members, a young man, Davila Irwin, who, when he began working on this SB 375, he described himself as being sort of going on the pipeline to prison, that he was from West Oakland and had really had both alcohol and drug issues in his family and was being sucked into that vortex down, spiraling down. And as he began learning about climate and about how it was impacting his own neighborhood, he became very interested and excited about the science of it, about the community organizing of it. And as he found his voice in this movement and became a leader in this movement and became now sort of an ambassador who's actually thinking about running for public office, in the space of 3 years, this young man turned his life around and went from really seeing someone who was disposable, really already kicked to the curb by society, to being someone who feels that his voice is needed to help lead and guide his community through this climate navigation, this climate change transformation that we're in. And so Davila is very much in my heart as we're sharing.
And you will have a chance to see and hear him in our video. We have video of him speaking to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. It's very moving.
That's great. Well, before we finish this conversation, I want to make sure that you give any web addresses or where people can find, go more deeply into your work and see these videos and this sort of thing.
Thank you. Let's see. Would that be now?
Well, no. Go ahead and read the poem.
And was there something you wanted to ask?
Well, there's an off the wall question that well, actually, let me actually ask this now, because then I'd like to conclude with your poem and then so that's good. Thanks. Good timing. So the off the wall question is this. And I've never asked two people this to respond at the same time, so it'll be interesting. So y'all will have to do some quick collaboration or just co-creation in the moment. But if you had the opportunity to invite any three people in human history to a dinner party where it's the two of you and these three other people, or just a one-on-one or one-on-two where you're meeting with one person at a time over a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or a meal or whatever, who would those three people be, and why would you choose them? Why would you invite them?
Well, I would nominate Nelson Mandela as one. He's not that far back in history, but after having spent that time in prison and bringing together the South African people, and actually helping to mobilize and move this community into a state of ending apartheid without bloodshed, I would put him in there. I'll let you nominate the other two.
That's a smart man.
Let's see. History. I guess I was thinking of
She's trying to find a woman.
Some of our early hominids. I was thinking of Lucy, sort of our great mother, someone who, came out of the trees and saw that, it was a climate change moment then too. And coming from a safe place of being in the trees and crossing the savannah, what was that like? To actually bring, from a place that you knew how to eat, you knew how to gather, you weren't sure how it was going to work in this new landscape, and to actually enter into that zone. I feel like we're in a great crossing. We're in of both a leave taking and a new adventure together as a tribe, as a global tribe, and as neighborhoods. So I guess I would want to take Lucy.
Love it.
Well, it's hard. It's obvious. This is a very hard question. I mean, you can think.
I know. And you'll wake up tomorrow morning with something else in mind for sure.
I can think of some names of different people that I would put in there, and but I also want to really talk about an important moment when the first African slaves were brought to America, brought to the New World, and who were faced with this incredibly complex and new set of challenges, and who looked out and saw a sea of white faces, and they themselves were on the chopping block, on this being sold, and they had to visualize, or had to try to visualize, what is waiting for me. And so I would want to know, have we actually mastered the dream that you held for us, that made possible for us to actually not only survive, but to be here and to transform this world in a way that it's not only a good home for your children and your great-grandchildren, but also for the grandchildren and people who come from all parts of the world to inhabit our metropolitan regions. So that's what I would say. And then, of course, we can add Mahatma Gandhi and Tolstoy and Martin Luther King.
Paloma, any last thoughts on that one?
Let's see. Well, I guess Hildegard is rising up there. How do we both, I love her sense of not only trusting her visions, God as the greening power, but also the sense of being a musician and a scientist and an herbalist. And so really seeing that we are of this earth and nature, and that each one of us has access to the healing that's needed, and is also a healer. So I think I would add Hildegard, and yeah.
That's great.
Roosevelt fits in there somewhere too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who did you just mention?
Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh, Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes. Okay, cool. All right, so poem, and then where can we learn more and go more deeply into your stuff?
This is Random Kindness and Senseless Acts of Beauty, 20th Anniversary Edition, and it's deceptive. It looks like it could be a children's book. And actually, these images are taken from a 12th century Heian scroll by Mayumi Oda. Many of you may know her work. For those of you who don't, she's kind of the Matisse of Japan and has lived here in our own Bay Area, but is back working with Fukushima survivors and refugees, establishing kind of a new vision for Japan in a post-nuclear, post-petroleum world. But the people who did these first images were people who did not read or write, and who organized themselves through picture language. So in a time when people were kept illiterate, they learned and innovated to organize themselves through a picture language called the Cho-Chujiga, which is a scroll. And I've had the great privilege of not only knowing Mayumi, but working in Japan for the last 30 years. Wow. And so the traditions of the East, as well as the West and the South, are part of this work for us. And
before you, I don't know whether you want to mention Desmond Tutu,
yes,
or you want to mention him at the end.
Well, go ahead, Carl. Bring him on.
I think it's, there are miracles in the world, and there actually is a miracle that two people from Soweto got the Nobel Prize for Peace. One of them was Nelson Mandela, and the other one was Desmond Tutu. And Desmond Tutu has offered and written the foreword to this book. And I think it's really a great honor for us, but it's also a reframing, in a sense, the popular image of random kindness, and puts it in a context of social and cultural struggle and transformation that he allowed he came forward and really did this essay at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Desmond Tutu. I would include him as one of the people at the dinner party, even though he's still among us.
Yeah, sure.
So thank you, Desmond. So this is just a few excerpts and lines from this. So we never know how much and we never know how far it goes, but always we have power. We have power. We're all making the soup we're all eating. We're all weaving the cloth we're all wearing. What we do can't go away. We've talked a lot about we today. Mm-hmm. We are all in this circle together, and anything we do, randomly and frequently, starts to make its own sense and changes the world into itself. And later on, we're right on the edge of discovering millions of new ways of being together, millions of new ways of dances we can do together, minute by minute. We're right on the edge. The steps we take now make new earth grow beneath our feet. The steps we take now decide what kind of earth that will be. In every moment, we have the choice to find the fight or make delight. We have power. It's a circle. Start the dance.
That's kick as Buddhist. That's fabulous. Wow, you guys, you're incredible. So tell us where we can find more and go more deeply into your work and share it with others.
Well, first I want to tell you that this book, Breakthrough Communities, was published by MIT Press, and it can be gotten on Amazon. You can also get it from us, from our website, which is
breakthroughcommunities.info. Breakthroughcommunities.info. And the Random Kindness Project with the Community Resilience Initiative is randomkindnessproject.org. Mm-hmm. And we're available. We want to come to your community. We love sharing this work. We're deeply rooted here in the Bay Area, but we also have wide wings. And we're actually heading to Kazakhstan this week and sharing this community resilience work there. And we love coming to your community.
And we have two other works that are will be finished in the end of this year or the beginning of next year. The first one is The Earth, the City, and the Hidden Narrative of Race, discovering new foundations for the great work of our time. And that's a book that I've written. And the second one, which is includes many other authors, is
Climate Justice, Frontline Stories from Groundbreaking Coalitions in California.
Awesome. Fabulous.
And do you want to say what our general website is? And
breakthroughcommunities.info.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Well, just blessings on both of you and your work and the communities and networks that you work with. And the next time, I promise you, the next time that Connie and I are in the Bay Area, we will absolutely look you up and get together.
That sounds
cool. Well, until then, blessings to you both. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael.